I already knew that the Israelis had done that in the previous administration. I knew they did it in 1973 with the Nixon administration, where they threatened to use nuclear weapons against the Arabs and forced Henry Kissinger to okay arms sales to Israel. So there's a long pattern of this. And I think anyone who knows anything about the Israelis knows that they're capable of this. They're capable of great violence.
What if the most powerful critic of U.S. foreign policy right now isn't a Democrat? It's Tucker Carlson, and he's coming after Netanyahu and Trump at the same time. He's saying Netanyahu has literally bragged about controlling the U.S. government and controlling Donald Trump. Those are strong words. And Carlson is backing them up by pointing to real risks, like the U.S. Fifth Fleet getting dragged into a Middle East war that mostly serves someone else's political career. Trust me, this one is worth paying attention to. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Ever wondered what it actually takes for someone to turn on their own side? Publicly, on record, no walking it back? Because that's what happened here. Tucker Carlson wasn't some outsider throwing rocks from the left. He was inside the tent for years. Fox News, MAGA World, the whole pro-Israel hawk circuit. He ran in those circles, built his career inside that machine, and knew exactly who he was sitting next to at dinner. So when he shows up on the System Update podcast and starts saying the US is acting like a client state for Israel, that's not a small thing. That's someone burning a bridge they spent decades building. So what actually changed? It wasn't some big ideological shift. It came down to one question he says nobody in that world could answer. What does a war with Iran actually get American workers? Not defense contractors. Not the think tanks in DC that get paid to write papers about foreign threats. Regular people filling up their gas tanks and paying their bills. He kept asking that question and kept getting nothing back. And here's the detail that really stuck with him. He says he sat down with Ted Cruz, one of the loudest voices pushing for military action against Iran, and asked him basic stuff, like how many people live in Iran? And Cruz didn't know. That's the guy arguing for a war against a country of over 80 million people, and he doesn't know the population.
Just watch Tucker Carlson in this video where he absolutely exposed and unmasked Benjamin Netanyahu and Ted Cruz. I can promise you that you have never seen this kind of expose from Tucker Carlson before. Anyone who skips this is definitely going to regret it, because Tucker Carlson shared so many insider details that will shock you. So let's keep watching.
I want to talk about some domestic stuff.
Okay.
And I didn't want to even mention him in this interview at all, but why do you think a foreign leader, Netanyahu, I'm talking about him, what's the secret here? It seems like, you got to step up your patriotism, Tucker. Like, he's more in love with the U.S. than you are. What the hell is going on here? I mean, guy comes out and tells us how worried he's about us and how much I don't think he pledges this love to Israel as many times that he has done to the U.S. I don't know how Israelis feel about that. But what's the deal with this guy?
He's using...
Carlson couldn't get past that. You don't know the population of the country you're trying to topple. That's a direct quote from Carlson on this. So his whole argument isn't really built around liking or disliking Israel. It's built around the fact that the people loudest about going to war haven't done the homework on what they're actually asking for. And trust me, that framing matters, because it lets him say, I'm not anti-Israel, I'm pro-America. And that's a much harder position to attack than just calling someone a peacenik or an isolationist. He also went after something uncomfortable about the conservative media world he came from. If you push back on any of this stuff, you don't get debated. You don't get fact-checked. You just get called a Nazi, and that's the end of the conversation. He said it pretty much exactly like that, and he's making the point that the label isn't random. It's a tool. It's meant to shut the conversation down before anyone has to actually defend their position with data. That's the real break here. It's not just that Carlson disagrees on policy. It's that he's saying out loud that the debate is being closed on purpose. And the people doing the closing don't have the numbers to win a fair argument, so they skip the argument entirely and go straight to destroying whoever's asking the question. He put it plainly on the podcast. He's not attacking Israel. He's attacking his own leaders for letting a nation of 350 million people get pushed into decisions that are bad for regular Americans because of pressure from somewhere else. That's his words, not a paraphrase. And once you hear it framed that way, it stops being about Tucker Carlson's personal politics and starts being about something bigger. Whether anyone is actually allowed to ask hard questions about where US foreign policy is headed. Here's the part that might actually blow your mind. Carlson says Netanyahu has gone around to regional players and literally bragged that he controls the United States and that he controls Donald Trump personally. Not as a theory. As a fact, he's telling people to their faces. Carlson says he heard this from people Netanyahu said it to directly. So this isn't secondhand gossip. It's Netanyahu allegedly walking into rooms and using US policy as proof of his own power. Carlson frames that as not just arrogance, but as a live policy situation playing out right now in real time. And here's where it gets really complicated. Trump's whole brand is that nobody controls him. He owes nothing to nobody.
Prime Minister, given the escalation of attacks on US allies across the Gulf, given the spiraling energy costs, the high costs in general, the US service personnel killed in this war, many Americans are asking that question, whether you misled their government into starting this war, and for how long should Americans keep paying the price?
Well, I misled no one, and I didn't have to convince President Trump about the need to prevent Iran from developing its nuclear program, putting it underground, and being able to launch nuclear-tipped missiles at the United States. He understood that.
That's been the core of his political identity since day one. So Carlson is basically saying the guy who sold himself as uncontrollable got played, and played hard. That's not an easy thing for people inside MAGA world to sit with. Carlson doesn't treat this as something new either. He goes back to the 1970s to show the pattern. Specifically, the 1973 Yom Kippur War. He says during that conflict, Israel threatened to use nuclear weapons against Arab nations, and that threat pushed Henry Kissinger into approving a massive arms deal for Israel. So the leverage being applied on Washington isn't a recent thing. It goes back decades. Carlson's point is that it's just more visible now. The specific thing he keeps coming back to is the Strait of Hormuz. Around 20% of the world's daily oil supply, over 20 million barrels, moves through that strait every single day. It's a narrow waterway, and it's basically the valve on global energy. The US Fifth Fleet is already positioned right there. So if the US gets pulled into a bigger fight with Iran, that strait becomes a target almost immediately. So you're looking at a situation where American gas prices spike hard, the Fifth Fleet is sitting in the middle of a regional war, and the person who benefits most from all of it is Netanyahu. Not American drivers, not American families paying heating bills, not American energy consumers of any kind. Carlson calls the whole setup a humiliation ritual. US leaders get lined up to publicly show loyalty to Israeli policy goals, and the cost of that loyalty, higher energy prices, real military risk.
We're going to go back. John, I'm going to throw this back to you now. President
Yes.
Trump has arrived.
Thank you, Marianne Rafferty. President Trump is entering the Knesset building. The president is going to be signing something. Perhaps our chief national security correspondent, Jennifer Griffin, knows more about what this is.
Less as an asset and more as a burden. When they got that message, probably through the Qatari interlocutors, that is when Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff began the final push to get this deal.
Gets handed to regular Americans who had no say in any of it. That's his phrase, not a paraphrase. What makes this hit differently than a standard anti-war argument is that Carlson isn't coming from the left at all. He's coming from American nationalism. He's not saying war is always wrong. He's saying this specific alliance structure, the way it actually operates right now, is working against American people and American interests. That's a different argument, and it's harder to just dismiss. So, did Netanyahu actually claim he controls Trump? Carlson says yes, and he points straight at the policy outcomes as his evidence. Look at what Iran policy actually looked like during the Trump years. Carlson says it tracked far closer to what Netanyahu needed politically than to what American energy security actually required. The US pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal in 2018. Netanyahu had pushed hard for exactly that. American gas prices climbed. The Middle East got more unstable. So here's the bottom line.
Pompeo's framing of the issue here.
Mike Pompeo is a criminal who should be arrested for plotting the murder of Julian Assange when he had no right to do that. Assange had never been charged with anything in the United States, and Pompeo plotted his murder. So he should be arrested I've said that to him.
Donald Trump announced today that Benjamin Netanyahu has agreed to his 20-point peace plan in Gaza. But ahead of that announcement, officials within the Trump administration had reportedly had it with Bibi and his ongoing feud with some in the MAGA media sphere.
I wish you a lot of luck with it, okay? And so the reason why the White House is in a panic is because Netanyahu is coming in here and thinking that he can boss social media around.
When a foreign leader brags about controlling your government, and then the policy outcomes match exactly what he wanted, that's not a conspiracy theory. That's just watching what happens and asking why. Let's dive into your own thinking on this. Next time you see a push for military action in the Middle East, ask one question: who pays the cost and who gets the benefit? Because those two things should point to the same country. Drop a comment below if this changed how you think about US foreign policy, and hit subscribe for more breakdowns like this.